to do that. In California, after the people, to be sure, in California voted against racial preferences in education and elsewhere, in California, the law school at both Hall and Berkeley UC Law School discovered that it had one African American, just one. Partly because it was not allowed to consider anything except the numbers, and partly because minorities didn't wish to go to that campus anymore. But having one student is not adequate, obviously, to achieve ultimate integration on the basis of race. So California did what all others do. It connived and got imaginative and changed its admissions policy. And now California is right back to where it was before affirmative action was technically stricter in California. The court mentioned in Greta that there needs to be what the court called a critical mass of the various races. If there's only one member of my racial group in the institution, then whatever I say will be seen as the group speaking, not me, but the group will all hear my language. We need to break down that kind of stereotype, and I think the way to do that is obvious, get more of the group in the classroom, in the classes. Another problem is that there's still a lot of discrimination against minorities in the U.S. Not formal, because that's quite illegal. So you have to be fooled deliberately to discriminate on the openly, to discriminate on the basis of race or groups. But there are plenty of ways to discriminate, with the result that you might argue affirmative action partly compensates for the reality of it, but there's still a lot of affirmative discrimination. The U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ginsburg has often made this point. Another reason for affirmative action is that racial and other communities need to have lawyers that have seen life the way they've seen it and have their understanding. A study of the graduates of the Michigan Law School reaffirmed that point, that many graduates, affirmative action graduates from Michigan, went on to serve their own communities, their own racial or other communities. Now, I can't resist an anecdote here. Bakke is the famous original affirmative action case in the U.S. Bakke, the white applicant who was denied and arguably had better paper credentials than minorities who were admitted, Bakke won his case, and therefore he went to the Davis Medical School. Graduated third in his class, not bad, he made his point. Bakke should have been rejected in the first place. He went on for a perfectly fine career at the Mayo Clinic, leading medical clinic. So, fair enough. What's the other side of that picture? There was an African-American doctor who graduated in the same class as Bakke, who was affirmatively action into the class. So how he got in through affirmative action. He didn't, to be sure, wind up at Mayo. He wound up at a massive hospital in L.A., somewhere in the depths of L.A., where he delivered something like 10,000 babies. He wouldn't have been there serving that community if he hadn't gotten into med school. He'd probably be at Mayo if he had. And we need to fulfill that kind of gap in production services. We at this law school, over the years, have graduated more than 1,000 candidates in our specialty program. And we are mostly very proud of that. And a lot of our graduates have gone on to very illustrious careers. Some of them perfectly standard careers, business and legal careers. Others serving whatever community they wish to serve. But it's been a huge difference, we think, in the state and around the country. Schools like ours have picked up some of the role in trying to achieve some curricular education for minorities. Some people say affirmative action, I believe Mr. Clegg say affirmative action stigmatizes the people that are under. Justice Thomas has made this point at the Supreme Court level in the U.S. And the response to it is, so what else is it? If I'm going to be stigmatized, I'll take affirmative action in the process. Another problem is that if affirmative action formal affirmative action is struck down, the reasons in favor of it, particularly in a democracy, the pressure coming from all the groups who are involved here and who will soon enough be a majority in the U.S. taken together, the reality is that if we don't have affirmative action, then something will rise to take its place, because we simply cannot ignore the basic imperative that we achieve racial harmony, which means racial equality in the U.S. And we can't put that off for another century or two before we recognize it. So, as California discovered, if you abolish affirmative action, it will rise again in some other fashion. Vote Hall cannot continue to exist in political reality in California if there are no minorities in Vote Hall. It has to accommodate them. So the University of California has accommodated in a lot of different ways. That is to say, if we strike down the standard process and procedure for affirmative action, it'll come in some other back door, because it will not be stopped because of the sort of meritorious arguments and the demographic reality in the U.S. So on policy balance, affirmative action deserves to be here to stay. And whether it deserves it or not, it is here to stay in the U.S. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a couple of questions that you texted in. We've had some great questions. One of the first that we got is, there is affirmative action that favors women, athletes, and students of alumni. Please explain how that will be effective.
I'll make a quick comment, an ironic comment about discrimination with respect to affirmative action with respect to women. I've been around here a long time, and when I was first here as a student, there were essentially no women in the Wisconsin law school. There weren't a whole lot of racial minorities either, but there weren't basically women. Now, women are about half and have been for a long time at the law school. Nationally, women appear to be headed towards 60% of the undergraduate student population in the United States as a whole. So there may be a call for a little affirmative action for men.
Well, you say that with a smile, but I think that the fact that is seriously being suggested and actually, by some accounts, used by universities points up a real problem with the use of preferences. It shows that the people who are going to be, who are today's beneficiaries of preferential treatment may find themselves being discriminated against tomorrow if it becomes politically correct to do so. And if their group becomes, quote, overrepresented and is no longer, quote, underrepresented. That's what's happening with women. Women are frequently the best qualified candidates way out of proportion to their numbers. And so now they find themselves being discriminated against. As are Asians. As were Jews.
Answer the question.
So the point is that when you have preferential treatment for some groups, though it may seem politically correct to do so, you need to ask yourself whether this is really a road that you want to go down. Now, with respect to athletes and alumni, I'm not a fan of alumni preferences. I don't think public universities should use them. I'm not a great fan of preferential for treatment for athletes either. But the legal issues, and I'm sure Professor Church would bear down on this, legal issues are very different. And so are the constitutional and moral issues. It is one thing to say to somebody, your scores are really not that great. We might let you in if you could throw a football a little bit better. Or if your parents had given us a little more money. But they didn't, so you're not getting in. Something else to say to somebody, the trouble with you is you're the wrong color. If you were a different color, you might get in. But you're not, and so you don't.
Thank you very much. Our next question that we got afterwards, after this question, we're going to invite our discussioners to respond, and then we've also set a mic up, so if you have questions that have not been asked, you can begin to form an orderly line over there to ask questions. We'll start with our question we received by text here. Given the degree to which standardized test scores are culturally loaded and normed for white Americans, how do you expect low-income African American and Latino students with an overwhelmingly different set of cultural references to perform as well as white upper middle class college applicants?
Very hot much? I'm happy to take a perspective.
Well, I'll answer that with an anecdote too. I taught for a bit in the law school in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian law students were extremely highly selected. At the time, there were about 25 million Ethiopians, and we took 20 in the class. So it was not easy to get in. For reasons that I won't go into, we had mostly a U.S. faculty teaching and the Ethiopians, and we decided it would be interesting to see if we could use the American LSATs as a predictor of performance among Ethiopian law students. So we gave the test. I monitored the test. Cheated a little bit here and there and gave the students extra time and other little deviations from the rules because I knew there was going to be trouble. And there was trouble. The LSATs that we gave to students in Ethiopia, we were going to compare the LSAT scores with their performance in law school to see if there was a correlation, in which case we might use the LSAT in Ethiopia as an admissions device. We discovered that it was a complete farce, and our students, most of them, would have done better to shut their eyes and answer at random. But remember, these are extremely well selected students, better selected in that sense than our students here. And one in a million to get into the law school. So they were bright. They didn't have any English language problems. They had another problem. They had no idea how to take a test. It took about half an hour in the LSAT. One of the students came up to me, he was on the parking lot, and said, well, I figured out the answer to the first question, but I can't remember how to mark it.